Welcome to Nicstalgia, the pop culture podcast where we have deep conversations about superficial things. I'm your host, Nicole Tremaglio, and each week my guests and I deep dive on the parts of pop culture that made them who they are today. If you like the show, please follow, rate, and review on your platform of choice. Watch us on YouTube and Spotify, and subscribe to our super fun newsletter at nicstalgia.substack.com. Enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Nicstalgia. I have a very special guest here with me today. Kelli is a fellow pop culture podcaster, and we have so many things to talk about. I'm really excited. Kelli, thanks for being here.
I'm so excited for this. I love
too.
following you on Twitter and Instagram, and I'm a fan of yours. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. I see that you're wearing, for anyone who's listening as opposed to watching, you're wearing a Backstreet Boys t-shirt. Who's your favorite Backstreet Boy?
Unfortunately, it was Brian up until recently. Now it's a tie between Kevin and AJ.
Yes, I would say the exact same thing. And also having watched their documentary a few years back and seeing a lot of them have Gemini placements. And so just seeing all of the air and the craziness and the interpersonal dynamics between them have been very interesting. And Kevin really taking on that more diplomatic role in the group. It's been very interesting seeing them kind of evolve over time. I actually have not seen them in concert, but that's someone I would still very much like to see.
I've seen them 13 times. When I say I love the Backstreet Boys, it's sick. They're just kind of the band that I've always loved, and going to their shows became a thing with my mom and I. So we have seen them perform at Fenway Park. We've seen them perform at Twin Rivers Casino. Literally the entire journey.
That's amazing. The most expensive concert that I ever went to was when I paid $300 in 2013 to see Justin Timberlake and Jay-Z at Fenway Park.
That's great. I heard that show was amazing too.
It was really fun. I went with my cousin, and she's about 4'10". I'm 5'1 3/4", and I'm usually about 5'4" or 5'5" because I'm wearing monstrous shoes. But I remember we were kind of two in after the aisle seats, and then we were just so small and could barely see anything. The people on the end were like, do you want to trade seats with us? And I mean, it was on the field, so they weren't the seats, but then we were just kind of standing on these folding chairs and dancing and still not obstructing anyone else's view. But I remember that being very fun and a really interesting experience. But yeah, we're both New Englanders too.
Yeah, I'm excited. I feel like we have a lot in common for sure.
Absolutely. So we'll kick it off with just a story that I really love about you, about how you met your current partner. If you want to tell it, it revolves around a pop culture figure that's very near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, so it's actually funny. I met her after our live show in DC. And sometimes we go out after the shows and people will be there and we'll be like, oh, we're going to this bar, come with us. And that night, I was so drunk. I barely remember it, but I did get her Instagram because I thought she was pretty. And we started DMing all this stuff. And then I put That's the Way It Is by Celine Dion on my Instagram story. And she DM'd me and she was like, I love this song. And I said, do you want to come to New York and listen to it with me? And she said, yes. And then literally took a train that night, and we've been together ever since.
That's incredible. That's the way it is. Mm-hmm. That's an amazing song. And if you already like that song, you have good taste automatically.
I love Celine Dion. She's the only concert I've ever cried at.
I have few concert regrets, but one of them is not having seen Celine at TD Garden in Boston for her Taking Chances tour. The album came out in 2007. I think the tour was in 2008, but it was just one of those where it was a little too far and a little too young to go by myself and drive myself. But I listen to the live version of that album all the time.
It's just so good. Like, one thing I love about Celine Dion too is that she's so weird. She's like
Mhm.
such a weirdo. And I think, and not in like a jughead way. Like, I feel like I just sounded like the guy from Riverdale, but she like leans into it. She doesn't try and hide from it. She's like, I'm going to sing this weird song. And if you like it, you like it. If not, I don't care.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that too. When you see just this kind of effortlessly funny quality about her, and she doesn't care about being goofy or silly. And she's just very expressive in a way that shows she doesn't take herself so seriously, even if a lot of the subject matter of her music is very melodramatic. She always has this lightness and this, I don't know, she just kind of like glides everywhere that she goes. And I really love, there's this series of books called 33 and a half, and they're all about music criticism. And there was this one, each is written about a different album. So this music critic, Carl Wilson, wrote about Celine Dion and basically how he came to have respect for her, because she's someone who's a very easy target for this archetypal Gen X male music critic. But even just hearing about the story of, she was at an award show and it was like the year that she won For My Heart Will Go On, and Elliott Smith, who you would think from a musical standpoint is kind of like the antithesis of what Celine Dion is and who she appeals to. And he thought she was just going to be this crazy diva, which, I mean, she is a crazy diva, but he thought she'd have all this security and this and that. But she ended up just being so down to earth and so cool that even Elliott Smith would go around and defend Celine Dion to people. And I'm like, you know what? I agree with that and I approve of that.
Yeah, and I loved her friendship with Whitney. Her and
Mhm.
Whitney were always like rooting for each other. And I don't know, it's nice to see that because we're so used to seeing women go against each other and seeing these two powerhouse legends just full out supporting each other at award shows and like calling each other out when they win an award. Like, I don't know, something about those two was so incredible to watch.
I just saw a video clip the other day where it's the, Entertainment Tonight or whatever voiceover. And it's like Celine Dion interrupted while she was being interviewed so that she could turn on the TV and watch Whitney Houston's performance. And then it shows her climbing on a chair to turn up the volume on the TV herself. And then it shows Celine Dion was watching Whitney's performance along with Courtney Love and Josh Groban. I was like, whoa, wait. Now you're losing me. Like, hold on, what? But it was so funny that to have that unwavering commitment. I think that that's something that I've had to examine within myself too, is just being a fangirl basically, and unlearning all of the kind of shame and the conditioning and the, well, you can like Backstreet Boys, but like not that much. Or like you
Hmm.
can love Celine, but like don't be telling everybody about it.
Right.
There's this way that we kind of are brought up to censor ourselves. And I personally, it's not even really from like a parasocial relationship standpoint. Like I know that I don't know Celine personally. I know that she doesn't know who I am. I mean, yet, I don't know, who knows. But just the fact that she's someone through which emotions are felt and like the way that she makes people feel. And okay, she doesn't write her own songs, this and that. Like there's so many critiques and criticisms from a music production standpoint, or like the genre of music, for example. But at the end of the day, she makes people believe in something. And
Hmm.
there's a lot to be said for that.
Yeah, and even like her story of growing up, and you're so right with that. And I think you should like lean into the things you like. That's why Laguna Biotch worked for me because like at first I was so nervous. I didn't tell any of my friends I made this Instagram. I was like, this is kind of weird. I think it'll be something, but it's kind of weird. But once you like fully lean into something or fully be like, you know what? I love Backstreet Boys and I really don't care what anyone thinks. It's like so freeing.
Absolutely. I mean, I've seen Celine twice in concert. One was when she was in New Jersey, days before the pandemic in
Hmm.
20 March 2020, and the other time was in September 2015 in Vegas. And I was on a work trip, and my coworker was like, "Yeah, yeah, have fun with that." And I told my family I was going to Celine, and they're like, "Yeah, yeah, have fun with that." No one wanted to go with me or anything, but like it kind of wasn't even about that. It wasn't meant to be a social experience. It was meant to be a spiritual one. And so when I was so happy to be able to look around, and it's like, yeah, maybe like I mentioned offline earlier, my best friend loves Celine Dion too, and that's something we can bond over. She came with me to the 2020 show, but just to have people respect you enough to be able to be like, you know what, I know that's your thing, but I'm really happy for you. Like, I might not join you, but I'm really happy for you. And when I first saw Laguna Biotch, I laughed out loud. Like, I laughed out loud. And I even think that to be able to elicit that kind of reaction from people, maybe everybody doesn't get it, but also everybody's not meant to get it. And the people who do get it, I have that kind of very esoteric sense of humor as well, where like if you get it, you just get it, and that's how you find these really fun people that you can relate to.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to you saying you went to the concert alone, that's something I have no issue doing. When I lived in Nashville, like my friends wouldn't go to a ton of events with me. And I'm like, well, I want to still go. And when you let go of that insecurity of everyone seeing me there alone, like I need everyone listening to know people aren't looking at you as much as you think. And if
Mm-hmm.
you're at a concert, everyone's there for the same reason. It doesn't matter if you're with someone or not.
Mm-hmm. You would like to think that they're there looking at the person on stage. I went to a concert by myself last summer to see Dashboard Confessional and Andrew McMahon. And oh man, when you hear your MySpace song and your AIM away message song, it really does hit different.
Absolutely. I got a really cool chance. I saw Chris Caraba of Dashboard. He did this show on someone's front porch in Nashville. So I got to like see that in person and I was almost in tears. And it's just so cool when you've listened to this music for half of your life and then hearing it live, you're like, holy shit, it's real.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What has been an experience that just being immersed in this pop culture world, like what has just been something that, okay, yes, we were all there when we were younger, like we're millennials or we have nostalgia for the 2000s or whatever the case may be, but how do you feel like I feel like we take it a step further and deeper, and it opens the door to really powerful experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you revisit something that you loved when you were like a kid or a teenager, like I guess the way I think of it, like Laguna Beach and these things that I love, like even Taylor Swift music, Backstreet Boy music, all of that, it's like these are weighted security blankets. And like I feel like everyone talks about healing your inner child. Nobody talks about that teenager that's still screaming. And when
Mm.
you kind of go back and revisit that, it really does help somehow. And it is cool to go back and listen to like I was just listening to Curse of Curves by I forget who sings it right now.
Cute
It's
is what we aim for.
Thank you. Yes, I was going to say Cupid's Chokehold. I'm like, that's a gym class hero song.
Mm-hmm.
But like, I was listening to that with my partner and I was like, this is my MySpace song. Isn't this fun? And then she played her MySpace song and just kind of, you get to know someone on a deeper level. I think when you realize what made them like happiest when they were 15, 16, because when you're that age, it sucks.
Yeah. I talk about this kind of concept of disillusionment where it's a young person with nostalgia, so their own lived experience, but for the recent past and very recent past. So, for example, when you're a senior in high school, maybe you're applying for colleges, maybe you're looking for jobs, maybe you're just doing something where it requires a particular level of focus or responsibility or the very, very first taste of adulthood. And you're like, this sucks. I miss like the good old days, but you're literally talking about 2.5 years ago when you were a freshman or a sophomore
Yeah.
in high school. And it's like, part of it's the hormones and like you're so angsty and everything is an existential crisis. I'm not saying that now it also isn't, but especially then it is. And you have this feeling of like, everything I say, like I take it, my brain goes to the song version. And I was going to say, there's gotta be more to life. And I'm like, do not make me start singing Stacy or Rico right now. I think doing the podcast too and researching and studying so much about pop culture and the sociology behind it too is realizing that, I had a great childhood and coming of age, and not everybody had that experience. But I think that ultimately everybody in some way or another can look back and find some little nugget of happiness, especially through music.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And what you kind of talked about at the beginning of the episode of people being like embarrassed, right? Embarrassed to like Celine Dion, embarrassed to like Backstreet Boys. It's like, but once you revisit that, you're not embarrassed anymore. You're kind of like, you know what? It was a good song and I'm gonna put it on a gym playlist now.
Mm-hmm. And no one's stopping me.
Exactly.
Yeah, I know. I think that finding the joy in life, I think that when people get older and it is very difficult to have to manage all of the responsibilities and the maintenance just of day-to-day life, hey, I'm going to take all the wins that I can get. And I love those videos where it's like, oh, my car watching me play the same songs that I did when I was 16. I still do it all the time. And I think even just, I have a sister as well. And so sometimes she'll be like, oh my God, we used to listen to this song in your car when you were 16, or this song was on the CD in the CD binder, or my favorite, she's like, this song reminds me of you drinking at college.
Yeah. My favorite thing is my friends from high school who, I haven't talked to in maybe 10 years. They'll be like, I heard Good Girls Go Bad by Cobra Starship and thought of you immediately. I used to play that song into the fucking ground.
Yes, and I guess you could say that's a love language where it's like, this reminded me of you, and to have a very strong sense of self and for people to be like, oh my God, that's so you, or you would do that. Maybe even if they wouldn't, that's not the point. The point is that you've created this own world for yourself where you can truly, truly just be you.
That is so beautiful.
Thank you.
Like everything you just said, I'm like, oh my goodness, that is so beautiful.
Thank you. And that's the thing too. It's like, the tagline of this podcast is deep conversations about superficial things. And I've come to realize that those two sides don't just exist. They're not just integrated with one another, but they truly cannot exist without one another. Because if you think too much about the mundane, the day-to-day, the responsibilities, that will drive you crazy. But there has to be that bit of levity as well, and enthusiasm and joy and playfulness and silliness. But at the same time, it's like, but this is actually just life. Like, this is your life, your one and only life. So might as well make it fun and enjoy it while it's happening.
I agree with you. And one thing me and my friend Dexter always say, we're like, people aren't willing to be silly anymore. And that's the problem. Everyone is so afraid to become a meme or so afraid to look embarrassing or something. It's like there's nothing wrong with laughing and just being silly and, having a dance party with your girlfriends to Spice Girls or any of that. That's happiness and that's okay. Yeah, I just saw O-Town. I went and saw an O-Town concert and I was like, I saw them in 2018 with like Aaron Carter and Ryan Cabrera. Mm-hmm. And when I went, everyone was like, why would you do that? I'm like, why wouldn't I? Like, I get to hear Liquid Dreams and Aaron's Party. Let's go.
Yes.
And I had the best time. And again, it's one of those things, if people just kind of like put those walls down of either judgment or insecurity or whatever, like you'll have so much more fun.
Absolutely. I got to meet Ryan Cabrera when he came to Connecticut few months ago, and there was kind of this festival going on in town. I don't know how they secured Ryan Cabrera to be on the bill here. And if it weren't extremely accessible for me to get to, I could understand. It's one of those mornings you wake up and you're like, oh, the weather sucks today. It's raining, this and that. But I'm like, this is my chance to see Ryan Cabrera. And there were only maybe 24 people at the show or so, which I'm like, this is a free Ryan Cabrera concert, guys. Like, I don't think you understand the magnitude of what's happening right now. But yeah, he performed his songs. There, everyone, we were all kind of front row, but it's like we're all in the front row and singing. And afterward, he took some pictures with people, was so nice. He literally, takes my phone to take a selfie of us. And I had just gone to a Halloween party the night before where I had dressed as Britney's with the Dump Him t-shirt.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was still my phone background because I was showing people like, this is what I'm supposed to be in case they weren't already my friend. Because if you were my friend, you would understand that costume. So I'm like, Ryan Cabrera probably doesn't think that's weird. Like,
no. Ryan Cabrera is just excited to be there.
Right. And I was excited that he was there too.
Yeah.
So as much as people now, it's like they're kind of all ragging on reboots and revivals and this and that. It's like, this is so not new. Like nostalgia is not new. Nostalgia marketing is not new. I did a whole episode on this too, because people are like, oh my God, why is this happening now? I'm like, it's a circle of life, people. Like you've just experienced the chasm, like that kind of breaking point phenomenon that I describe as like when you get old enough to experience the completion of a trend cycle and your generation is no longer the fixture generation of youth culture, aka millennials. Like, of course they're going to come out with a kids movie with a Destiny's Child song in it because people who are parents know that song from when they were younger. Like it's just the natural progression of things. So if you didn't get to see Ryan Cabrera in 2004, what better time than now?
Exactly. I just bought Usher tickets and I've always wanted to see him like my whole life. So I'm so happy that there is that nostalgic wave coming back because I can't go to Vegas and spend like $900 on Usher tickets.
Are you excited for him to perform at the Super Bowl?
I'm so excited. Usher is truly like one of my favorite artists. I think he's probably one of the best male vocalists of all time, in my opinion. But yeah, I'm really excited about it. I think he has so many anthem songs, so many songs that would, play during a sports game anyway.
We don't have jock jams like we used to.
No, we don't.
Now a jock jams compilation would just be like an Usher greatest hits album.
Right, it's like Usher, Rihanna, and Pink.
It was funny. I was in a dance cardio class recently and the teacher was like, oh, okay, now we're going to do a Katy Perry. And it was a Pink song, but I'm like, same difference.
I'd be like, it's Pink. It's actually, hello?
I'm like, it's the same. It was like a new Pink song. So it was similar to new Katy Perry songs where it's like, it's just a top 40-esque sounding thing versus the different, I don't know, I feel like there's been a little bit of a flattening there too with kind of like the eras of artists. Whereas like when I personally loved Katy Perry's and Lady Gaga's, because they kind of happened simultaneously, like their first era in 2008, where Lady Gaga was like this crazy, like one eyelash was always hanging off and performing in New York and being all crazy. And then Katy Perry with One of the Boys, and when her Thinking of You music video came out, where it was like she was the soldier's wife or whatever, had us all like gasping for air. And it's like, meanwhile, this is so unrelatable to current life. But anyway, I just loved, now I feel like, I hate to sound like they don't do it like they used to in the way of like, oh, back in my day, because every generation thinks their stuff is better than everyone else. But I don't know. I still feel it a little.
I mean, I completely agree with you, especially with music, because I believe it was actually Beyonce who was like, people don't make albums anymore, they make singles.
Hmm.
So we're never going to have another, I mean, another Lemonade unless Beyonce literally makes like another album, or Confessions, or even Autobiography by Ashley Simpson. We don't really get albums like that. And I think Taylor Swift's popularity is because I do think she's like a talented songwriter, but she's also so good at like calling back to other albums. So you have to understand this current album. You need to listen to like five of her past albums in order to understand just one. And her formula works so well because of that.
Mm-hmm. Right. If you don't recognize an Easter egg or a callback on the surface level, you feel like you're being left out of the larger
Mm-hmm.
narrative. But like that's because there is a larger narrative. And actually, I was in a different dance class this morning, and usually it's just like, okay, you do the one song, you do the next song. But there was a block of three songs that was the live version from a Beyonce concert where it was like, okay, Deja Vu into Baby Boy into Countdown. And I was like, I love this. We could just do for the entire 45 minutes of class all live Beyonce songs. That would be okay with me.
The way Beyonce puts together a show is insane, because you'll think you're hearing like Crazy in Love and it turns out to be like Partition. You're like, how'd that happen?
Yeah, I saw with the same week that I saw Justin Timberlake and Jay-Z, I also saw Beyonce in concert, which was like, I don't know how, I don't know where I found the money to do all of these activities, but they happened. And so I think comparatively, I really did like the Beyonce concert that I went to and all of her music prior to that. I think that once it was the Mr. and Mrs. Carter tour and Beyonce and Jay-Z became packaged and marketable as a couple, because I had been a huge Jay-Z fan prior to that also. But then when they started, yeah, being marketed as this entity, I was like, I don't know how I feel about that.
Yeah, and that's fine too. I think a lot of people probably felt that way.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how the musicians of our generation have evolved as well.
I know once millennials got money, we weren't like starting families. We were buying concert tickets finally. We were like, no,
Mm-hmm.
we're going to go see every artist we've ever wanted. We don't want children right now, but we do want to see Beyonce, Taylor Swift in concert.
Well, I think about that one day. If I have children, they probably won't care, because I think that's a misconception too, is that a lot of like older people think that their kids like care, and it's them like that meme where they're like, okay grandma, let's get you to bed. Like they
Right.
actually don't care about your lived experience and your knowledge and your wisdom. Like they're young and dumb, like that's the nature of being young, is you get to do that. But I like to think that if I have just future generations, someone will say, hey, did you ever see Taylor Swift in concert? You ever see Beyonce, Britney Spears, like the biggest, I guess, legends of our time? And for most of them, I can say yes. Again, no one thinks that's cool yet, but I do.
No, I totally think that's super cool. And yeah, I love it. I love concerts. They're like my favorite thing in the world.
Yeah, I've always been a huge music person,
Hmm.
and that is just, I don't know. It's just always been so emotionally resonant to me. I did watch a lot of TV when I was younger too, but I know that you also. This is like the perfect fusion between TV and music. I'm a huge TRL person, and I know you were too. Did you ever? I mean, I guess we were a little bit too far from New York to go into the audience, unless you went and skipped school one day.
I was able to be in the crowd outside when I was in sixth grade. My dad brought my brother and I to the city, and we were staying in Times Square. And I got to go at like the very end. I saw Damien Fahey wave out the window. And I remember my dad being like, oh, like, I don't want to like just stand here. I'm like, please, please, please. And he let me go into the crowd. I was super young, what, 11 or 12.
Mhm.
But yeah, I was able to like be crazy in the crowd outside for a little bit. And then, yeah.
That's really exciting. That's something where, right, I was a little too far from the city and a little bit too young to have gone. But
Yeah, mine
I,
just like lined up, you know.
yeah, that's
Hmm.
really exciting. And I think that's even something too, where I don't want to go into a whole spiel about the monoculture, but there was just something where we all had something to talk about, that wasn't as fragmented, or as individualized as consuming content is now.
Absolutely. And one thing I appreciate so much about TRL is it also exposed me to a lot of different music because I'm a pop girl and I have no
Hmm.
issue being like I love pop music, that's my favorite. But I'm watching and I'm like, "Wait, that Limp Bizkit song was like really catchy."
Hmm.
Or that City High song, I want to listen to it again. And I know TikTok has a lot of music, but there's no place like that. And TRL told us what was cool, right?
Hmm.
TRL was like Backstreet Boys are number one with Shape of My Heart, NSYNC's number two with Bye Bye Bye. So it's like this week Backstreet Boys cool, and
Hmm.
we were exposed to so many different like trends that way and artists, like I said, like there's no way I would have known who Jay-Z was growing up in like Hanover, Massachusetts. I didn't know who he was, but seeing him retire on TRL and have like his jersey in the rafters, I was like, maybe there's something to that Jay-Z guy.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think that show, like, I still remember, this is so random. Like, I forget what happened to me 10 minutes ago, and yet I still remember this, that the anthem by Good Charlotte was number one on TRL on my 13th birthday. And I was like, this song rocks. Like, I'm so glad this is the number one song on my birthday. And I was like super into them and Sum 41. And I think now that's what I call music served that
Mhm.
purpose too, where it's like they had just enough variety where it was still, there was just like a mass palatability where all of these songs are going to appeal to a broad range of people, but it still included different genres too.
Yeah, there's really nothing like that anymore. And another thing with TRL, I mean, I've heard like AJ McLean say this from the Backstreet Boys. He's like, it was more important to have your song on TRL than to do well on Billboard, on any chart, because TRL is where the consumers, the teenagers are watching.
Hmm. I watched a documentary or something, yeah, where they were talking about that cultural value of TRL, and that was like the place that you had to be. And
Was it Dark Side of the 2000s?
it might have even been Dark Side of the 90s because it was on in
Okay.
like the late night. Yeah, that's sounding about right. Because I did just watch a different documentary that I don't remember what it's called, but it's a newer one on Hulu, also about the 90s. It's very much through the Gen X lens,
Okay.
obviously, which I thought was very cool and interesting. And they were like, teenagers had more money in their pockets than ever. I'm like, well, not going to be a very good program once you get to the millennial generation. So don't remind me too much about how economically sunny everything was back then. Um, but yeah, the value of TRL and to get to connect with your consumer in that way, like you're physically sitting right next to them, and yeah, it just showed that Backstreet Boys were like the band that everyone was the out of everyone who people were the most obsessed with.
Yeah, I still remember when AJ went to rehab and the Backstreet Boys had to go on TRL and tell everyone AJ's in rehab.
Like, how do you even do that? Like, what? I
It
could
was,
not imagine being their press person and being like, okay, you're going to go out on the stage and this is what you're going to say.
and I do think there's a lot that celebrities go through now, obviously, that wasn't happening in the early 2000s. But Backstreet Boys couldn't put out like a notes app thing saying, hey, AJ went to rehab. They had to literally go on like Today's Show, Good Morning, like Regis and
Mhm.
Kelly. They had to do the whole media circus of it.
That's crazy. I'm curious what you think, just as a career fan, essentially, someone who continues to be a fan. I also identify as one of those. Like, what are your feelings about the accessibility and the democratization of access to celebrities through social media. Like, you would have had to write a fan letter to Brian 25 years ago, and now it's like you could literally just DM him and like he might actually see it and might actually respond. Like,
You know, I think there's good and bad to it. I think it's great that now celebrities have some sort of access to talk to fans where they could just pick up their phone, put a video up on Instagram or something like that. I think that's awesome, but it also blurs those parasocial lines. And I think that can get really confusing. Or say AJ right now is really on TikTok all the time. If I tag him in something, why isn't he responding? I tagged him and he responded to somebody else. Why isn't he responding now? Which can get dangerous, right? Like another Taylor Swift's always liking TikToks. Why didn't she like mine? Am I not a good enough fan? Do I have to do more? And luckily I'm older, right? Like I'm 32 and I don't have that mindset. But if I was a 13-year-old, I might.
mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think it's just, it must be also difficult for the celebrities to figure out how they want to kind of navigate that. Do they want to be someone who's hyper online, or do they want to be like a Jennifer Lawrence who isn't online but knows what's happening? So it must be also hard for like management to figure out how to utilize this in like a safe and realistic way.
That's what's so tricky about social media, is that we are the product ourselves. And so when you think about someone like Britney Spears, who has been a brand since the inception of her career. And so, okay, brands aren't just products anymore. It's not just, let's make a Barbie doll, let's make a t-shirt, let's make a hat, let's sell CDs. Pop culture, anything that can be monetized, which in today's day and age, the limit does not exist.
It's anything.
It's anything and everything if possible. And so the fact of the matter is that with social media, you have to position yourself and like, what will my interaction level be? What will my engagement level be? How do I want to position myself? There are actors who are more activists. And so now everyone, to an extent, is expected to have a position or an opinion on something. And that's unprecedented and unexpected. And yeah, there's so many different facets to being a person in the public eye. And there's always going to be that push and pull of that's what our society values. And everyone is just trying to get attention. But then Britney's also a good example of how that attention can be weaponized as well.
Yeah, I mean, and then you look at someone like a Nicki Minaj, who, how she uses social media is super different. I don't know how else to put that. But it is crazy to see like which celebrity decides to do what. Because there's Beyonce, who rarely post, but I guess she does post like carousels, but doesn't like speak. You know, and then there was Taylor, who loved Tumblr, and once Tumblr went away, she kind of wasn't as much on social. Yeah, I'd love to like talk to an agent and see how they decide how their celebrity is going to be.
Yeah, I mean, and with Taylor Swift, everything is so calculated as well. Everything is planned meticulously. And to be able to time things, and granted, some of her fans that are super, I'm not saying that some of these very, let's just say, committed stans, like, I'm not saying that their videos aren't entertaining. I'm not going to dive into how they're concerning, but when you see a video and it's like, well, she dated this guy for this many days and this song was about him, and so this album should be coming out on this day, and it's like, number one, that is completely insane, but number two, that is also very interesting.
Yeah, Taylor, I'm, you know, as someone who's a Taylor Swift fan, like, I let other people figure out the Easter eggs, you know, like I'm like, I can't give that much brain power to it.
Yeah, I'm like,
but I'm glad
okay,
someone does.
Yeah, tell me when you're done. Yeah, there's a lot with parasocial relationships and fandoms. There is so much labor that goes into it. And I think about my time during the pandemic when I was a BTS TikTok ethnographer. And I would basically just I was so immersed in that environment. And learning about K-pop was something totally new to me and very exciting. And especially during that time when you're so depressed, and to have these people who you really feel like, you've seen them eating and sleeping on live streams and everything. And you see the work that the fans put in to galvanize and to mobilize
Mhm.
into, certain causes. And especially with K-pop, the free translators and things like that, where it's like you literally have to put in work. Like, being in a fandom is like an unpaid internship. That's how much work it requires, at least if you're really, really involved in the day to day.
Well, I'd love your input on this, because this is something Troy and I talk a lot about on Beyond the Blinds with like celebrities and social media. Because growing up for me, and I'm not sure if it's same for you, but with Troy as well, we looked at these celebrities like gods, right? Which I know isn't okay. They need to be held accountable, all of that. But right, like there was no way I could get Julia Roberts. I couldn't talk to her anyway, right? But now, because you have like her Instagram or whatever, I'm not sure if she's on it, but just her as an example, there's like, it's more accessible. So I think people are expecting celebrities to be normal humans. And like, they're just not. They're never
Mm-hmm.
gonna be. You don't get like $20 million a movie and be normal.
Mm-hmm.
And I would just love like your thoughts on that.
It really goes back to what we were discussing before with the positioning. These
Mhm.
celebrities are brands, it's brand positioning. So, for example, how you were mentioning with Julia Roberts, the example that pops into my head is Jennifer Aniston. She is someone who, she was
Mhm.
on Friends, got a sweet paycheck, continues to get the paycheck from that, but then she could just disappear for years. She would make a movie, and then when you're done making the movie, you're really not in the public eye. You're an A-lister, so you will get photographed when you leave your house, but you are not communicating directly with the public. So a year, 2 years could go by. You know that Jennifer Aniston is still famous. You still see her at award shows, but you don't have a constant line of communication with her. That is how she is positioned. She's also of the Gen X generation, which is going to be different than how a millennial or a Gen Z celebrity would behave. I would say the divergent other end of the fork from the Jennifer Aniston Gen X perspective is Gwyneth Paltrow. So Gwyneth Paltrow has taken the opportunity, same with Jessica Alba, where you've seen the celebritypreneur essentially. So maybe you'll see these celebrities take on an active role on social media because they've had kind of their second act after acting or alongside acting. And they will have their own businesses, or they will become the face of products. And so they literally have something to sell. In Gwyneth Paltrow's case, she's built a whole world, a whole
Right.
lifestyle. Um, and so she uses social media in a very different way. Um, but yeah, those are the two main examples that I think of. And then I guess even like Britney Spears, like she's the best example of someone who was built as a brand for our consumption.
Mhm.
And we've all seen like the very, very, there's a book called Toxic about, how we treated Britney and Paris and all of them. I think Paris is like the positive side of the coin, where she knows that she is an object of
Mhm.
public consumption, and that if she tries to seek validation for her personhood, for her existence, she will never get it, because that's not what the people want. The people don't
Right.
want a real person. They don't want a real person with feelings. They don't want a real person with flaws. They want her to do the baby voice, and they want to buy stuff so that they are rich and skinny. That's it, because that's what our society is built on, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
So Paris Hilton takes advantage of that, whereas Britney, it destroyed her. So
Yeah, I think it's just truly changed like celebrity as a whole as we see it. And I honestly I do miss when I would just see celebrities in Us Weekly every week,
mm-hmm.
or, People magazine. I think as someone who loves pop culture and has studied it since I was young, it's just like it's almost just become too much.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't even imagine what it's like to be a young fan of someone now. You have
Mm-hmm.
to follow them on every social media. If you're not, then you're not a true fan. it's the pressure that is obviously put on like the celebrity or whoever, but also put on the fan. Like you were saying about the K-pop, people are learning and translating for free. Like that's wild. What we did was like coding for MySpace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the purpose remains the same, right? I didn't
Mhm.
code because of the technology. I coded so that I could express myself and therefore connect with other people around me, which it's the same now with fandoms. That's the ultimate purpose is people kind of seek this sense of belonging. But I miss that too when people had more of a low profile. And what's that meme that goes around now? It's like I really didn't need to, like, we know too much about everybody now.
Yeah, secrets. I miss secrets. For
I
sure.
do, and I think now too, I think a lot about, I call it examining the past through a contemporary lens. So of course we're going to look back and be like, oh my God, I can't believe we thought that was acceptable back then and it's not now. And I think that this makes it a lot harder with like separating the art from the artist when
Right.
we do start to learn so much about people. Not saying that, oh, I wish we didn't know anything about these bad people, because it's the like systemic issues that need to change. People will be doing bad things regardless. It's just about who we hold in high regard and who we look back on as, you know, the king of this or the prince of that or whatever, you know, who we hold in high regard, who we have esteem for. Um, I think that social media has absolutely changed that. You can even use Justin Timberlake's
Hmm.
recent can you even call it a downfall? That's the thing. Like, it's not even a fall from grace. Whatever the slight chip on his shoulder that's there now, that would not have been possible without social media and for fans to feel like their voices are heard, because ultimately the systemic inequalities are still there. So it's not
Right.
like, oh, we got fairer as a society or we got less misogynistic as a society. As much as there's some awareness around things, again, like, it hasn't structurally changed to the point where Justin Timberlake will not be able to continue his trajectory. It's just now to actually see him break character to an extent and feel the scrutiny at a very public visible level. I think that's a good thing.
I agree with you. I do. I do think that that's positive, and I don't know if you can like truly cancel people. I always say that. Like, I don't think the only person I can think of that was like canceled was like Kathy Griffin. And I don't know, even think she truly deserved that one. Um, but yeah, it is interesting to see specifically Justin Timberlake crack, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then it's interesting to see these Britney and Justin fans going back and forth. I'm like, they broke up 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And he should be held accountable for sure, but it's still that happened 20 years ago. You think Justin Timberlake thought that whatever happened in 2000 would come back to him?
Of course not. And that's the thing too, is that, well, it's just because this is how our society's set up for people to be delusional. But like, when people are always like, oh my God, do you still keep in touch with your castmate from this movie that came out 20 years ago? It's like, do you keep in touch with your coworker from 2 years ago? No. You work
Right.
together. Like, you're not necessarily friends with everyone you've ever met in your life.
That is so funny.
It's just dumb. Like, people are like, "Oh my God, like, on set, what was it like?" I'm like, what do? You film for like 12 hours a day and you have to rehearse your lines and you're tired and you're hungry and like the lighting is weird. Like, no, it's the behind the scenes is not the same as in front of the camera. And again, it just, you would think people would understand this, but that's not the point of entertainment. I actually thought it was very funny. I did write down shorthand notes of me watching Laguna Beach season 1 just so I could tell you about them. But the first thing that I noticed, other than the fact that Come Clean, which is an amazing song, was the theme song, was when the first thing it says is like, basically it says, this is real. And so, I remember with the hills and everything being like, what? Oh my God, this wasn't 100% real. Like, the perception of reality TV in 2003 was just different.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously Laguna and Hills, like I will defend them a lot. And I think what people will hear or whatever, it's like Spencer Pratt saying this was fake. A, B, and C were fake. Okay, but not everything else was. And one thing that pisses me off about the Hills cast specifically is how much they like to say what was fake and what wasn't, but their story's constantly changing.
Mm-hmm.
And but they're able to say like, reality TV is not real because we know that now. But
Mm-hmm.
like Spencer, you were still writing these blogs about saying Lauren Conrad talking about her vagina. You were
Mm-hmm.
still doing that. That wasn't fake. That was real. And Lauren being mad about that was real.
Mm-hmm.
But it just makes me so mad that these reality TV people can get away with that so easily now and just be like, oh, production made me say, production made me do that. It's like production didn't make you write that blog off season because you weren't
Mm-hmm.
filming when that happened. And even like Whitney talking about the Paris trip, she's done multiple different kind of interviews where she says, actually did go to Paris for a week and it was great. No, I never went to Paris. Oh wait, no, I did, but it was 2 weeks later and I was there for a month. Like, none of their stories add up, other than one, Lauren Conrad's, that no one wants to talk about.
Yeah, I remember watching and just hearing their dialogue in the show too. Whereas now, if you think about Vanderpump Rules, for example, like reality shows are just a lot more developed now than
Mhm.
they were really at their inception. And I just remember thinking, this dialogue is so stupid. But since I'm about their age, and let's say, I don't know, I'm a few years, yeah, we're about the same age, so it's like these people would have been like the older kids in high
Right.
school, right? So it's like we would have gone to high school at the same time as them. So I'm like, this dialogue is so stupid, but since I'm their age and was a teenager at the same time in the cultural zeitgeist of the mid 2000s, it makes sense. And seeing their outfits made me die because everybody can try their Y2K look, their McBling aesthetic, their this and their that trend. Just watch Laguna Beach and it will tell you everything you need to know.
I mean, even the music of Laguna Beach. Laguna Beach is definitely like my favorite out of the Hills or Laguna,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, but there is something so fun about watching Laguna Beach over. Like, I did
Mm-hmm.
have to take a break for a while.
Mm-hmm.
But I just watched, like, I saw you kiss her the other weekend, and I was like, this episode is still one of the best episodes of reality TV. No one can tell me otherwise.
Yeah, I even if there were parts where like, when they would film like the editing of Lauren and Steven where like they're sitting at a table and I'm like, I could only imagine that in person, especially when you're young too, right? Like sometimes you just sit around a table with people and do nothing. Like sometimes you're literally just doing nothing. Whereas the editing made it look like every time Lauren her eyes moved somewhere else, it panned over to Steven and like made it look like this. Like it was now as an adult looking at it, a very like not only because I'm an adult, but because of reality TV production, like you see it as looking so contrived and over the top.
Oh yeah, yeah. Like I've been able to interview a lot of cast members of Laguna, and one thing they'll always say is like, sure, we were asked to talk about things, but there was like no script or anything. And I'm like, okay, I can handle that. I can handle,
Mm-hmm.
bring up Morgan S not being able to come to your party because you don't like Taylor. Things I get that. That's
Mm-hmm.
but to me, I guess that's not fake. It's produced, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, some of this stuff like you just couldn't make up. I wrote here, I feel like talking on a cell phone in a tanning bed gives you every kind of cancer. I don't know who did that, but like watching them get ready was gave me life because that's exactly how we used to get ready. The Maybelline product placement, using the little eyeshadow foam brush, um yeah, singing Goodbye to You by Michelle Branch, epic. Um,
Straightening their hair without any heat protectant.
yes, even like, okay, this is so niche, but in the second episode, well, at the second episode, they went and got their makeup done at MAC, which I just feel like you could not be in high school without going to MAC, even if you couldn't afford to buy anything, and get your makeup done. And when Kristen goes grocery shopping, because they're going to have the boys over the house, and she's like, let's make some pasta and put like chicken in it. Like, that is the most, like, if you ask a 16-year-old girl in the 2000s to make dinner for people, like, I don't know, I can't exactly put my finger on it other than the fact that it was just being that age at that time.
And they seem so cool, right? And I don't know if it was because I was in like cold Massachusetts, but I was like, California is the place to be.
Yeah, the OC sold me on that.
I was obsessed with the OC, One Tree Hill. Like, I was just ready to be like in any alternate universe.
Yeah, I've seen the OC, I think like 2.5 times or something. And the most recent time I watched, I'm like, if I lived in California, or if I grew up in California, I am Summer Roberts. Like, it's kind of concerning.
That's so funny. I'd be like Anna, like kind of an outcast, but like talks to some of the cooler kids, I guess.
Well, I'm watching Gilmore Girls for the first time.
Okay.
And to know, I didn't love how, so Adam Brody was on that show, and I felt like they really didn't wrap up his storyline. He was just like gone. But I'm like, you know what? I know that that's because he went on to go be Seth Cohen and go live in that universe. And so for that, I am grateful.
Are you a big Seth Cohen girl?
I was always, okay, so the first time I watched it, like when I was in high school, I was like, oh my God, love him. And I love that kind of music too. Like, as much as I'm a huge pop girly, I was always super into alternative and indie stuff as well. And so I very much liked Seth for that, because it's like, that was a kind of person, like the cool version of him is someone that I would have actually been friends with in high school. Whereas Ryan, I was like, he's just so like mad about everything all the time. And I was like super, super happy-go-lucky. I mean, I like to think I still am, but in high school, I was just very head in the clouds. And so someone that was that serious, like, didn't really resonate with me too much. But then when I watched it again, this was maybe like 1.5 years, 2 years ago, I thought Seth was intolerably annoying.
That's how I always felt. I always felt like Seth really tried to dim Summer's light. And like, he would run away from problems instead of confront. I was always more of a Ryan, even with his bangs in season 2. I loved it.
Yeah, I think with Ryan, and even just listening to Rachel and Melinda's podcast, where they would basically be like, yep, so Ben looked hot in that episode. And I'm like, see, now we can just be real, like talking as grown women, like, let's just be real. Ben McKenzie's hot, and were him and Marissa, granted, that New Year's Eve scene where they kiss is like, I want that to happen to me. But him and Marissa were never even a good couple. Right. It's just the fact that to be able to captivate the audience that much, where you're even rooting for people who any sane person would be like, that's the worst couple ever. I still think there was something just very magical about that show.
When I revisited it, like, I didn't like Marissa when I watched it the first time. And the second watch, I was like, she was just a 15-year-old alcoholic. Like, she was just going through it.
Yeah. I think Marissa's my favorite character. Whenever, I feel like most people, when they're like, oh, my favorite character is XYZ, they're doing it based on who they see themselves in or who they like the most. Whereas I base it on, who do I have the most compassion for? And who do I, like, whenever they come on screen, I know shit is going to go down. That is how I pick my favorite. So I would say Marissa. It's like something, God knows what she's going to pull out of her purse or what she's going to do. Like, it's always going to be interesting when this girl is on screen.
My favorite was Julie Cooper. So.
Oh, that, you know what? She was my other favorite, because that's a great example of that, where who is Julie going to be seducing today? We don't know.
Right. I mean, people even give me shit for loving like Dan Scott. I'm like, listen, Dan Scott carried One Tree Hill.
I have to watch more episodes. I think I only watched the first season, but yeah, in the first season, I hated him. And he's very like the Troy Bolton's dad archetype, which I thought was hilarious to compare, the parallels between those two, because High School Musical is so unserious. But then One Tree Hill's also like kind of unserious, but it's so serious, it's unserious.
Yeah, I mean, later seasons of One Tree Hill are just like, what is happening? But Dan doesn't get better. He only gets worse as a character. And that's what I really love, is that, like, I guess at the very end, they give him a little bit of, like, a redemption. But, like, I don't know. I love a character that's just bad.
Well, he seems bad. He fits the bill when it comes to that.
He was also, like, one of the better actors. It's a CW show, you know.
You want bad, you're gonna get bad.
Exactly.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for talking to me today. I could literally talk to you forever.
I know. I'm like, I know we've been recording an hour, but if you want to talk about other things, I'm still here.
Sounds good. Well, we gotta have a part 2 then. Thanks again for coming on, and thank you everyone for listening, and we will see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
That's a wrap for this week. If you like Nicstalgia, connect with me on social at Nicole Tremaglio, subscribe to the Nicstalgia newsletter at nicstalgia.substack.com, and follow, rate, and review on your platform of choice. Everything's linked in the show notes, including where to find out more about our guest of the week. Thank you so much for your support, and that was this week's episode of Nicstalgia.